In the middle of the empty restaurant, the young waitress offered her soup to an old poor man shivering from the cold. The wealthy customers whispered, annoyed by the bad smell. But when the man raised his arm, revealing a luxurious watch, the waitress took a step back, and the entire room fell silent. The murmurs faded as everyone awaited the truth behind the disguise. The rain showed no mercy that gray afternoon. Drops ran down the restaurant's window panes, drawing irregular lines that trembled over the empty sidewalk. Bell's Eatery displayed an almost deserted dining room, tables too clean, chairs perfectly aligned, but few customers willing to enter. Emily, the young waitress, circulated among the tables, trying to keep her spirits up. She mentally counted the coins in her apron pocket, thinking about the overdue bills, the rent that wouldn't pay itself, and the expensive medicine her sick mother so desperately needed. With each beat of rain outside, she felt the weight of it all more heavily. The manager, Ted, was near the counter, arms crossed, furrowed brow, as if the empty restaurant was her fault. Sandra, her colleague, appeared now and then, making acidic comments about the lack of movement. Mark, the robust cook, worked in the back, slowly stirring a pot, unhurried and without expectation that anyone would come to appreciate his stew. That was the atmosphere, a heavy despondency, a place where no one truly smiled. In the opposite corner of the room, a wealthy couple adjusted their napkins on their laps, keeping their backs straight and their gaze critical. They had entered recently, drawn by the need to escape the rain, but didn't seem satisfied. Emily tried to smile at them but received wrinkled noses and bored looks in return. The young woman swallowed hard. No one there knew how much she struggled to keep her head high. No one knew about the long sleepless nights, about the family ring she had to pawn the week before, about the promises she made to her sick mother that everything would be all right. Then the door opened. A faint noise of hinges and the cold air from the street came in with it. Emily raised her eyes, expecting to see another wealthy customer, or perhaps a curious passerby. But what came in was an elderly man, with disheveled beard and wet, worn clothes. The smell that accompanied him wasn't pleasant. The rain dripped from his dirty jacket, forming a small puddle near the door. For a second, the entire restaurant seemed to stop. The wealthy couple in the back exchanged indignant looks and a slight grimace of repulsion. Ted tightened his lips and began approaching the counter as if to intervene. Sandra, in a corner, shook her head in disapproval, and Mark, in the kitchen, raised an eyebrow, curious, but soon returned to stirring with his wooden spoon. Emily hesitated. She herself hadn't had lunch yet, saving every penny. But she couldn't ignore the image of that soaked man, with drooping shoulders and shivering from cold. She looked at Ted, who gave her a warning look but said nothing. Emily's heart tightened. He needed something warm. Even if it meant sacrificing her own meal, that sandwich and soup she had planned to eat later. Taking a deep breath, she walked to the man, keeping her voice soft. "Good afternoon, sir. Is everything okay? The weather is cruel out there." The old man raised his eyes, surprised by the kindness. He didn't say much, perhaps a grunt difficult to understand. Emily came a little closer, ignoring the bittersweet smell that surrounded him. "Can I help you with something warm? A soup, a sandwich, a coffee? Don't worry about payment now. Please sit down. You must be cold." In the background, the wealthy couple whispered. The woman breathed a light, "How absurd," to her husband, who made a disapproving pout. Emily pretended not to hear. Sandra whispered something ironic. "Are you crazy, Emily? He's going to scare away the few customers we have." But the young waitress didn't back down. Instead, she put her hand in her apron pocket, feeling the crumpled bills that would have been her meal and maybe some change. It hurt. She needed that food, that energy. But she just couldn't ignore the old man's situation. "Scare who away?" Emily retorted quietly to Sandra. "We can't leave him like this." Sandra sighed and returned to the counter, incredulous. Emily called Mark from the kitchen, asking him to prepare the soup and sandwich. He grumbled something, but obeyed. Ted, arms crossed, limited himself to saying, "I hope this doesn't affect the cash register, Emily." "I'm watching." The young woman returned with the steaming soup and simple sandwich. "Here you are, sir. It's to warm you up. Don't worry about the money now, please. Eat and rest a bit." The old man raised his trembling hand, taking the spoon. Emily noticed the dirt under his nails, the deep wrinkles on his face, and the fatigue stamped in every line of expression. He didn't look directly at her, but nodded with a murmur and began eating slowly, carefully blowing on the spoon. At that moment, Emily felt a twinge of satisfaction. It wasn't much, but at least someone with more need than her was getting something hot and solid in their stomach. In the back of the room, the wealthy couple rolled their eyes. Ted, behind the counter, cleared his throat and cast a look heavy with disapproval. Emily knew she might be reprimanded later, knew that maybe this wouldn't help sales or the sympathy of the few customers at all. But for some reason, she couldn't bring herself to regret it. The rain continued beating on the window pane, the wind howling outside. The restaurant was small, with simple decoration, some wooden tables, a worn ceramic floor, and aged pictures on the walls. There was no luxury, nothing special, except for the occasional goodwill of its waitress and the smell of honest food prepared by Mark. Mid-meal, the old man adjusted his coat sleeve, and in a quick movement, something shone on his wrist. Emily narrowed her eyes. A luxury watch with a sophisticated face, an object completely out of place in that picture of abandonment. That detail intrigued her. How could a man with those clothes, that dirt, and that strong smell have an expensive watch on his wrist? It was just a glimpse, a moment of perplexity, but enough to plant a seed of doubt in her mind. A draft of cold air entered when someone opened and closed the door. The wealthy couple decided to leave, leaving meager tips on the table. Emily collected the bills almost without looking, still thinking about what she had just seen. Sandra remained distant, and Mark, in the kitchen, served himself a cup of bitter coffee. Ted stayed near the counter, one eye on Emily and another on the wall clock, imagining how many customers might still appear on that miserable day. The old man continued eating in silence, finishing the soup drop by drop, savoring each piece of the sandwich as if it were his first hot meal in a long time. Emily didn't want to bother him with questions. She just felt the need to observe him from the corner of her eye. After a while, he rested the spoon on the empty plate and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. He cast a brief look toward Emily, mumbling something she couldn't decipher. Then, he stood up with some difficulty, straightened his body, and walked toward the door, always with slow steps. When the door closed behind him, leaving only the raindrops as witnesses to his departure, Emily took a deep breath. Her head was spinning with questions. Who was that man? Why had he appeared like that? And why did he have that expensive watch? Her thoughts were interrupted by Ted. "Emily, you lost your own lunch. We don't have money to throw away." She just shook her head without responding. There was something bigger happening, she could feel it. Some piece out of place. He wasn't just a hungry beggar. No, that man was different. Trying to get back into rhythm, Emily collected the dishes, cleaned the table, all with slow but concentrated movements. The rain was diminishing outside, although it still made the windows vibrate from time to time. Sandra gave her a warning look. Mark said nothing, just shook his head, and Ted disappeared behind the counter, probably thinking about bills, costs, and losses. Before moving away from the door, Emily couldn't resist and peeked through the foggy glass. Outside, the old man was no longer there. The wet street reflected the light from a solitary lamppost. This episode would go unnoticed by many, but not by her. With each passing minute, the memory of the watch glinting on the man's wrist returned to her mind, intriguing her. While turning her back to the door, still perplexed, something unexpected happened. In the corner of the room, illuminated by a yellowish lamp, The old man slightly raised his head. He hadn't disappeared completely, had just stayed at the margin, covered by a pillar, perhaps protecting himself from the rain for a few moments. His eyes fixed on Emily for a second, deep and mysterious, as if they wanted to say something she wasn't yet ready to understand. Then he was really gone, leaving the young waitress with her heart beating faster, certain that this encounter held a secret not yet revealed. As Emily walks away, intrigued, the old man slightly raises his head, and his eyes fix on her for a second, mysterious, as if they held an important secret. The next day, dawn brought a fine and persistent drizzle, brushing the facade of Bell's Eatery with tiny droplets. Emily arrived earlier than usual, still reflecting on the old man from the previous afternoon. She had slept poorly, tossing in bed, thinking about the shine of that luxury watch on the wrist of such a disheveled man. Now, with the empty dining room and the smell of fresh coffee hanging in the air, she tried to understand what had happened. Was he just a stranger needing help or something beyond that? Ted, already at the counter, was flipping through some papers with irritation. As soon as he saw Emily, he gave a slight nod but said nothing. Sandra hadn't shown up yet, and Mark was in the kitchen, finishing sharpening his knives. Few customers ventured out at that hour, and the fine rain didn't help attract business. Emily, adjusting the coffee machine, remembered the old man disappearing into the night, his gaze, the way he had simply vanished without her understanding his purpose. As the morning progressed, 2 customers came in quickly, ordered tea and toast, and left shortly after. Nothing to warm up the atmosphere, nothing to increase the register. Ted, with sunken eyes, didn't take long to complain. "Emily, we need more customers. That act of generosity of yours yesterday didn't help at all. Be careful next time." She didn't respond. She was tired of justifications. She knew she had done the right thing, but also feared the impact on her job. She needed that salary, couldn't lose it. While quietly cleaning a cup, she recalled the old man's gesture, accepting the soup with trembling hands, the silent gratitude in his eyes. Was that wrong? No, she thought, certainly not. But then why did she feel so insecure? Near noon, Sandra arrived with a sour face, bringing an umbrella and wet purse. She let slip an unpleasant comment. "I hope we don't have any foul-smelling visitors today, Emily. I can't take this story anymore." Emily gave her a disapproving look, but preferred not to start a discussion. The internal tension was already enough to drag the day. Sooner or later, however, memories of the previous day returned. A customer was browsing the newspaper near the window when he mentioned reading about a mysterious businessman, a local millionaire involved in discreet business. Emily listened from afar, didn't give immediate importance, but something about the mention of a rich businessman made her stomach turn. Was it just coincidence? In her head, the old man's face kept coming back, interspersed with the image of the watch. Why would someone so poorly dressed have such a valuable watch? The rain continued fine and persistent. No sign of the old man all morning, no suspicious movement. The doorbell rang sporadically, bringing and taking hurried customers. Ted didn't miss a single opportunity to demand more effort from Emily, as if she could control people's desire to come in. When afternoon came, the atmosphere in the restaurant seemed even heavier. Sandra and Mark communicated in monosyllables. Ted furrowed his brow and ran his finger on the counter, checking if Emily had cleaned properly. She ignored the looks, striving to maintain calm. While serving a quiet customer, she thought about the old man. Where would he be now? Had it been just an isolated episode? Then, almost without warning, the door opened with a creak. Emily had her back turned, but felt a shiver run up her neck. When she turned around, there he was again. The same man, the same worn clothes, the beard still disheveled. He appeared without sound, slowly, stopping near an empty table. This time there wasn't such a strong smell as before, perhaps due to the gentle rain washing the clothes. Even so, his presence caused murmurs among the few present. The solitary customer in the corner dropped his napkin on the table and got up to pay. Sandra watched over her shoulder, shaking her head. Ted raised his eyes and frowned, visibly displeased. Emily took a deep breath and walked to the old man, feeling her heart speed up. "Hello, sir. It's still rainy outside. Can I help you with something?" He raised his eyebrows slightly without answering. This time, he didn't seem as dejected as before. He maintained a curious, attentive look. Emily didn't understand. Was he there to eat again? He hadn't brought money, it seemed. Or was he there just to observe? "If you'd like something hot, I can bring you coffee," Emily said, trying to keep her voice steady. The old man didn't speak a word. He rested his hands on the table, slid his fingers on the wooden top, as if evaluating the environment. Emily felt a knot in her stomach. Why wouldn't he speak? Why did he come, eat, or just look, and then vanish? The rich couple from the previous day wasn't there, but two other customers, a middle-aged man and a lady with a floral umbrella, exchanged curious glances. Sandra nudged Mark and whispered, "There he is again. What's this fixation, Emily?" Ted, behind the counter, cleared his throat and warned, "No free meals today, understood?" Emily felt her cheeks heat up. She didn't want to create a scene. The old man, however, didn't seem to hear anything. He stared at the restaurant, the details, the people. When his eyes finally landed on Ted, something strange happened. He narrowed his gaze as if recognizing the manager from somewhere. For an instant, his lips tightened, almost forming a sardonic smile. There was something familiar there, but Emily couldn't say what. Feeling the tension rise, she decided to act with caution. "Sir, excuse me, do you need any special assistance? I can offer you water at least?" This time, he nodded with a minimal head movement. Emily went to the counter, got a glass, and served water. Ted watched her silent. Sandra muttered something she didn't want to hear. Mark remained in the kitchen, probably not knowing what to think. When delivering the water, Emily noticed that the old man kept one eye on Ted. And then, in a slow gesture, he raised his arm and adjusted his sleeve, revealing again the expensive watch. Only now, under the yellow ceiling light, the metal's shine was even more evident. A finely crafted object, nothing that anyone would wear without noticing the contrast with the worn clothes. She couldn't hold back her curiosity. That watch, it's very beautiful. He didn't respond, just moved his wrist gently. His gaze at that moment left Ted and turned to Emily. There was an intelligent gleam in his eyes, as if saying, "I'm paying attention to you." Emily felt a chill. This man didn't seem like a common beggar. The silence lasted a few seconds. The old man drank the water in small sips, still staring at her. Emily was hypnotized, not knowing whether to escape his gaze or try to understand him better. Ted cleared his throat again, impatient. Sandra drummed her fingers on the table. The customer in the back pretended to look at the rain outside, but was clearly paying attention to the scene. Then the old man placed the empty glass on the table. The gesture was so calm, it seemed rehearsed. He got up slowly, adjusted the old coat on his shoulders, and walked toward the door. Before leaving, he cast a final look at Ted, a look that seemed to carry knowledge or judgment, and then turned to Emily, squeezing his wrist where the watch shone. It was a subtle movement but full of meaning. It seemed to say, "Pay attention. See who I really am." Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. She was confused, intrigued, anxious for answers that wouldn't come. The old man crossed the door and disappeared into the drizzle, leaving a trail of unformed questions and growing tension in the restaurant's air. "Emily," Ted said in a severe tone, approaching. "Who is this man? Do you know him?" "No. I don't know, Ted. I haven't the slightest idea," she stammered, her voice failing. He didn't say anything else but made his discontent clear. Sandra just moved her lips without sound, and Mark remained absent, perhaps reflecting on the strangeness of it all. Emily couldn't relax. That man must know something about the place, about Ted, about her. Why had he come back? What did he want to demonstrate with that watch? There were no answers, just the feeling that something big was behind his silent presence, and the way he had looked at Ted, as if he knew him from long ago or had information that could change everything. At that moment, Emily saw her own reflection in the window, a worried expression, eyes full of doubts. The old man had left her like this, suspended in questions. She tried to calm her heart, but couldn't. The watch still shone in her memory, and the man's eyes seemed to pursue her, even though he had already left. Emily shivers as she notices the old man staring fixedly at Ted, as if recognizing the manager, and then turns his gaze to her, slightly squeezing his wrist, where the watch shines. The rain wouldn't let up. Throughout the day, Bell's eatery remained almost empty, with only a few passing customers seeking shelter or a hot coffee to ward off the cold. Emily circulated between the tables, trying to maintain a smile, although deep down she felt a growing weight. The old man's presence in previous days had left unanswered questions in the air and tension that was difficult to ignore. She was drying a glass, watching the door, perhaps waiting, without wanting to admit it, for the stranger to return and clarify whatever was happening. At the back of the restaurant, Sandra was wiping the counter, muttering incomprehensible things. Mark, in the kitchen, was tending to the stew unhurriedly. Ted, at his usual post, dissatisfied with sales, monitored Emily's every move. The atmosphere was uncomfortable, a discomfort that seemed to increase with each raindrop bursting on the window pane. The afternoon wore on, and fatigue was setting in. Emily tried not to think too much about the old man's expensive watch, the way he had looked at Ted, his silent appearances. Maybe he was just an eccentric wanderer, maybe something more. Either way, she needed to focus on the present. Her salary was low, her sick mother needed medicine, the rent was overdue. Without customers, her job was in danger. When the door opened, Emily raised her head expecting to see a regular customer, someone who would bring some movement and tips. But two men burst in. One look was enough to realize they weren't normal customers. Heavy coats, dark hoods, wet boots that left dirty footprints on the floor. There was something aggressive in their posture, a suspicious way of looking around. Emily felt her spine freeze. They didn't seem interested in paid meals or any friendly dialogue. "Hey, Missy," said one of them, his voice rough like stone dragging on the ground. "We're hungry and broke. How about a courtesy meal?" Emily tried to stay calm, but her voice came out hesitant. "I'm sorry, but we need to charge for meals. I can offer something simple, soup maybe, but I can't give anything without receiving—" The man raised his hand in a sudden gesture, interrupting her. "No moral lesson. We want free food now." Ted, who was behind the counter, took a step back. Sandra moved away, trying to appear invisible. Mark appeared from the kitchen, a ladle in hand, frowning. Emily took a deep breath, her heart racing. She needed to avoid trouble, but how? "Please," she risked. "I can offer something hot and we can talk about this, okay?" The man laughed, a dry sound without humor. The other one beside him stepped forward, eyeing the cash register. "No talking. Come on, hurry up. Open that register." Emily lost her speech for a second. She saw Ted move away, perhaps in fear, Sandra just peeking from behind a table. She needed to do something. She tried to call Mark, even knowing the cook wasn't a fighter, just a burly, honest man. "Mark, can you help here?" she whispered, almost voiceless. Mark came out of the kitchen with the ladle in hand, looking a bit lost. "Hey guys, calm down. I can prepare something, but no trouble, okay?" "Shut up," growled the bandit, hitting the counter with his closed fist. The tension exploded. One of them advanced on Emily, pushing her against the chairs. She stumbled, almost falling. The other tried to open the register, forcing the lock. Emily regained her balance and, in a desperate impulse, grabbed a heavy roll of pressed napkins that was on the counter. It wasn't a weapon, but it was heavy enough to serve as defense. Without thinking twice, she hit the bandit's forearm with the roll as he was forcing the register, making him back away. The man grunted, surprised that the girl had reacted. Mark, seeing Emily's boldness, brandished the ladle, trying to push away the second man. It wasn't very effective, but at least it got his attention. The bandit who had pushed Emily got angry and raised his fist, ready to retaliate. She closed her eyes for a second, fearing the blow, but something unexpected happened. The storage room door, near the counter, suddenly opened. Like a silent shadow, the old man appeared. That same poorly dressed man, with disheveled beard, appeared behind the bandit who was threatening Emily. In a surprisingly agile and firm movement, he grabbed the criminal from behind and pulled him forcefully. The bandit, caught by surprise, lost his balance and fell to the floor. The accomplice, seeing the turn of events, decided not to risk it. He dropped the register and ran for the exit, cursing and promising to return. The first one, now fallen, got up hurriedly and fled after his partner. In a few seconds, both disappeared into the wet street, leaving behind a tense and breathless silence. Emily, trembling, thanked the old man, her voice broken. "Thank you, I didn't expect this, you helped me." The old man didn't respond, just gave a slight nod, as if to say, it was nothing. His gaze was more alive than before, but still impenetrable. He took a step back, analyzing the scene. Emily holding the napkin roll, Mark with the ladle in hand, Sandra peeking from behind a table, Ted still half hidden behind the counter. He seemed to be evaluating each one, understanding their role in that place. Then, without ceremony, the old man headed for the door. The rain was still falling outside, soft and steady. He left, disappearing on the sidewalk, leaving everyone unsure what to think. Emily took a deep breath, feeling her heart race. Who was that man, after all? How did he always appear at the right time? And why didn't he say anything, ask for anything, explain his presence? Mark put away the ladle, wiping his sweaty face. Sandra rose, still pale. Ted, previously so rigid, didn't utter a single word, just looked at Emily with a mixture of surprise and relief. They had escaped a robbery, perhaps a greater tragedy thanks to the old man. But this unusual situation raised more questions than certainties. The afternoon followed its course, now with the adrenaline subsiding. Emily tried to return to routine, cleaning tables, straightening chairs. Mark returned to the kitchen, a little more serious than normal. Sandra, arms crossed, looked at the door from time to time, like someone waiting for a ghost. Ted checked the register, confirming that nothing had been taken. Apparently no serious damage. Everyone came out unharmed. The restaurant was still standing. There was, however, something that Emily had gained in that confrontation. Respect. Mark, who was normally grumpy and indifferent, gave her an approving look when she passed by the kitchen. Sandra avoided sarcastic comments, keeping quiet, thoughtful. Ted didn't praise her, but he didn't criticize her either. That, in itself, was already a small victory for Emily. And deep down, she felt a strange gratitude for the old man, despite all the confusion his mysterious figure provoked. Later, when night fell, business remained slow. People feared the street. Violence prowled the city. Emily looked at the rain through the window and remembered the scene of the old man taking action. That unexpected strength, that confidence. Who was he? An unlikely guardian? Someone testing the honesty of the place? Only time would tell. At that moment, feeling the weight of silence, Emily approached the door, still intrigued. Outside, just the wet street, the reflection of lampposts in the puddles, the distant murmur of a passing car. No sign of the old man, no sign of the bandits. Looking outside, Emily sees only the wet trail on the sidewalk. However, in the door's glass reflected, She notices Ted's serious face behind her and his harsh words. This can't continue like this. Dawn was advancing over the city, washing the streets with a fine, uninterrupted rain. When Emily arrived at the restaurant in the morning, fatigue tied her shoulders. The memory of the failed robbery the day before still pulsed in her memory. Upon entering, she encountered Ted with his arms crossed, leaning on the counter with a furrowed brow. Sandra was silent, sitting in a corner fiddling with her phone. Mark was preparing something in the kitchen without much enthusiasm. There was a heavy atmosphere, something that the persistent rain didn't help to dissipate. Enough of this mess, Ted said firmly as soon as Emily approached. No more free meals, no kindness without return. We need profit, understand? She nodded, without trying to argue. After the events of the last few days, she didn't want to provoke more tension. Business remained slow. 2 customers came in, ordered coffee, and left without delay. Sandra, passing by Emily, commented with a hint of sarcasm, "See what your kindness brought? Criminals, confusion, a weird old man. Ted is right, you need to stop." Emily didn't respond, but her gaze turned to the window, the tiny drops running down the glass. She knew it wasn't her kindness's fault that the criminals appeared, but she understood that in Sandra and Ted's eyes, everything was a chain reaction. For them, generosity was a luxury, but Emily couldn't simply ignore a hungry man. That went against what she believed. "We need to improve sales," Ted announced at the counter, speaking loudly for everyone to hear. "I want promotions, posters, something that attracts customers, and no more idle chatter with beggars." Emily bit her lip, uncomfortable. Mark stirred the stew, shrugging. Sandra muttered something indecipherable. The rain persisted, the monotonous noise on the window panes. In the middle of the afternoon, while Emily was serving juice to a distracted customer, she remembered the old man's look during the robbery. His attitude in facing the criminals had been brave. So why did that man keep appearing and disappearing without saying a single word? Why the expensive watch? Each memory of hers was accompanied by more questions. After a while, when the dining room emptied, Emily approached the window and looked outside. Nothing but the wet street, few cars passing. But it was as if the old man was there somewhere, watching from afar. At night, almost closing time, Emily couldn't contain the impulse to take a peek behind the restaurant. She went out through the back door, under the thin rain, and searched the side alley. Empty boxes, garbage bags, a puddle reflecting the yellowish light from the lamppost. No sign of him. Sighing, she went back inside, feeling foolish. Why did she care so much about that stranger? Maybe because he had helped her twice. Maybe because his gaze carried a mystery that Emily couldn't decipher. Ted, already impatient, was closing the register with a sour expression. Sandra was leaning on the counter, yawning. Mark was cleaning the knives. Emily took the cloth and started cleaning the tables, rearranging the chairs, trying not to think too much. Even so, the questions came in a whirlwind. Who was that man? Why did he appear only at key moments, as if testing everyone? Then, something interrupted her thoughts. While adjusting the sideboard near the door, Emily noticed a folded napkin, set aside, discreet. She frowned, trying to remember who had left it there. There were no more customers in the dining room. Could it have been one of the few who came in and left quickly? Or perhaps the old man? With careful fingers, she picked up the napkin and unfolded it. She expected to find something written, a note, any clue. But it was just blank paper. No letters, no visible sign. Emily held the napkin up to the light, looked for stains, drew hypotheses in her mind. Nothing. A piece of folded and empty paper. Still, it seemed like an intentional sign, something left to instigate her curiosity. Ted approached, curious. "What do you have there?" "Nothing, a napkin," Emily replied, trying not to show frustration. He shrugged and returned to the counter. Sandra didn't even pay attention. Mark finished cleaning the kitchen and said goodnight, leaving without asking anything. Emily kept the napkin in her apron pocket, staring at the rain one last time before closing. It was just a piece of paper, but she felt there was meaning there, perhaps a silent challenge. The old man seemed to communicate without words, testing her patience and perception. That strange man, who demanded nothing but appeared whenever something unusual happened, who sported a luxury watch under rags, was leaving his mark, even absent. The hours passed quickly. The dining room was already clean, the tables arranged, the chairs in place. Ted was the first to leave, slamming the door with some irritation. Sandra followed in silence, the sound of her heel shoes echoing on the wet floor of the entrance. Emily stayed last, as always, checking everything twice. She got her coat, turned off the main lights, leaving only the weak glow of the lamp near the door. She quieted for a moment, hugging herself, feeling the humidity in the air and the smell of cleaning products. She looked around, imagining the old man sitting in a dark corner lurking, but there was no one. Even so, her mind insisted he could return at any moment. What would be his next step? A new silent appearance, another enigmatic gesture. Taking the key, she walked to the door. Before leaving, she touched the apron pocket where the napkin rested. Blank paper. A mute message. He wanted her to think, to examine the context, or maybe it was just an incomprehensible game. Either way, the man's presence lingered in the air even in his absence. Emily felt a slight shiver on her neck. Outside, the rain persisted, though weaker. She closed the door, turned the key, and heard the click. She stood there under the restaurant's awning, looking at the empty street. A lamppost light flickered. Far away, a dog barked softly. She could swear that if she looked carefully, she would spot a figure somewhere on the sidewalk. But there was no one. Just silence, the cold night, and a mystery to be unraveled. She placed her hand over her pocket again, sighing. The emptiness of that napkin seemed to echo the emptiness of answers. It was useless to force her mind now. She needed to rest, recharge her energies. Tomorrow would be another day, and maybe the old man would reappear. Maybe she would discover something. For now, there remained only doubt and tension, advancing with her under the rain. Emily opens the napkin looking for any clue, but nothing. Still, she feels that something big is behind that man's presence. She turns off the lights, thinking, who is he? And what does he want from me? The morning dawned humid, with rain still making its presence felt, although finer and quieter. Emily arrived at the restaurant early, fixing her apron and adjusting her hair in front of the foggy glass door. Inside, the air smelled of fresh coffee, and Ted, as always, seemed worried. Sandra was reading something on her phone, muttering quietly, and Mark was stirring the pot, testing the flavor of the stew with the tip of the spoon. The atmosphere was as heavy as the cloudy sky. The restaurant was emptier than usual. After the incidents, it seemed that the few customers were avoiding coming in. Emily couldn't blame them. The atmosphere had been strange, with bandits showing up and a mysterious old man coming and going without saying a word. Ted had already made it clear that he needed better sales and fewer distractions. She felt the pressure in every suspicious look she received, but tried to maintain a professional smile. 1 hour passed, another hour dragged on. 2 customers came in, ate quickly, and left without exchanging many words. Sandra commented something about the rain that wouldn't let up. Mark, with the ladle in hand, asked if Emily really thought that strange old man would return. Emily shrugged, trying to hide her uneasiness. She didn't know what to expect. She was still thinking about the blank napkin she had found the night before, hidden in her apron, and wondered if it had some hidden meaning or was just a coincidence. At noon, Ted let out an impatient sigh. "We can't continue like this," he said to no one in particular, drying a glass with an already damp cloth. "No customers, no sales, I won't be able to handle it." Emily bit her lip. She understood his frustration, but couldn't ignore the feeling that something bigger was at stake. Her personal problems, her sick mother, the late rent, added to the restaurant's tension, creating a dark cloud over her thoughts. Even so, she tried to keep her head high. By mid-afternoon, the scenario worsened. Mark, complaining about the lack of supplies, discovered that the best steaks had disappeared again. "Who's been stealing food from in here?" he asked, irritated, showing the empty pantry to Emily and Sandra. Sandra just shrugged, suspicious of everything and everyone. This will completely end Ted's patience. Emily felt a chill in her stomach. First, the robbers. Now someone was stealing food from the house. That only complicated the situation more. Ted, upon learning about it, hit the counter with contained anger, then rubbed his forehead, too tired to yell. The afternoon was slow, rain dripping outside. Emily tried not to think about the old man, but remembered the expensive watch on his wrist, the times he had appeared and done something unpredictable. Could he have any connection to all of this? The idea seemed absurd, but she couldn't rule out anything. Deep down, she wanted to believe that the old man wasn't a villain, that his generosity hadn't been in vain. She needed to maintain faith in humanity, otherwise everything would crumble. In this tense atmosphere, a shy customer came in and sat near the window. Emily served him coffee, tried to make conversation, but the man was distracted, looking at the gray sky. After paying, he left only a few coins, an almost automatic gesture. The emptiness returned to dominate the room. Sandra complained about the strange smell coming from a cabinet. Mark checked the kitchen utensils. Ted reviewed bill after bill, shaking his head. Late in the afternoon, the unexpected happened. The door opened with its usual creak. There he was again. The old man in worn clothes, his beard still disheveled, now a little less dirty, but with the same enigmatic aura. Emily felt her heart race. Sandra sighed in displeasure. Mark peeked from the kitchen, and Ted crossed his arms, visibly annoyed. This time, the old man stopped near the window, observing the environment more calmly than ever. Emily gathered courage, approaching. "Good afternoon. Can I help you? Would you like something to drink?" The old man stared at her for a second, evaluating her with his eyes. There was a strange serenity about him, as if he didn't care about the tension around him. Without saying anything, he sat at an empty table near the counter. Ted shot Emily a warning look, and she understood the message. No free meals, nothing that would hurt the cash register. "If you'd like a glass of water or coffee, just let me know," Emily risked again, keeping her voice calm. The old man didn't respond. He looked around the room, noticed Mark in the kitchen, Sandra pretending to arrange napkins, and Ted, firm at the counter. Then he placed his hand on the table, and with a slow gesture, left a folded piece of paper there. Emily shuddered. Would it be another empty note? Another silent message? She approached carefully, but before she could touch the paper, the old man raised his hand, signaling for her to wait. He seemed to be testing her patience. Emily swallowed hard. The tension in the air was palpable. The other employees kept their distance but didn't take their eyes off them. Suddenly, the old man stood up, leaving the paper on the table, and walked toward the door. Emily wanted to follow him, but the man turned his face to her with a subtle look, wordlessly warning that the paper was to be found later, not now. He opened the door and went out under the light rain, without saying a single syllable. Emily was paralyzed. Ted, without patience, approached. "What's this now? More paper?" "I don't know," Emily replied, bending down to pick up the note. Upon unfolding it, she found only another blank space. No letters. The napkin enigma repeated itself. She sighed, frustrated. What kind of message was that, without any words? Sandra rolled her eyes. This is getting ridiculous. A mute old man, blank papers. He must be playing with us. Mark shrugged, returning to the kitchen, apparently tired of the confusion. Ted shook his head, incredulous, and whispered, "We don't have time for these games. We need to sell, Emily, sell. If this guy keeps showing up, he'll drive away more customers." Emily didn't respond. She put the paper in her pocket, along with the napkin from the night before. 2 silent messages. 2 pieces of nothing. Still, she felt there was something behind the silence. Something about observing, waiting, understanding. Perhaps the old man was testing not just her patience, but also her ability to see beyond the surface. Later, when the sun was already setting and the restaurant was about to close, Emily had an idea. She passed the light of a small flashlight under the first napkin, trying to see if there was invisible ink or some kind of hidden mark. Nothing appeared. She did the same with the second paper, looking for reliefs, watermarks. Nothing. Just white, an emptiness that made her question her own interpretations. Tired, she approached the door, hearing the dripping of water in the gutters outside. The street was almost deserted. She remembered the stories the newsstand vendor had told about a mysterious businessman, rumors about character tests that rich people sometimes did with employees. Could the old man be someone important, in disguise, evaluating their attitude? Was that the reason for the expensive watch? Emily had no answers, only questions. She tried not to go crazy over it. She kept the papers in her pocket, willing not to comment on them anymore with Sandra or Ted. Maybe it was a secret between her and the old man, something that only she needed to understand. She thought about her mother, the need to pay bills, job insecurity, and wished for a clear sign, a clear message. But for now, silence was her only clue. Slowly, she turned off the lights in the room, checking twice if everything was in order. Ted and Sandra had already gone. Mark left without saying goodnight. Emily locked the door, hearing the click of the lock, and stood under the marquee watching the drizzle. The sky carried a dark blue tone, threatening storm. She knew something was coming. The old man didn't seem like the type who would disappear without fulfilling his purpose, whatever it might be. The city was cold, the restaurant almost empty, problems increasing. But Emily refused to lose hope. If the old man was testing her, she would show resilience. If the world conspired against her, she would persist. As she walked along the wet sidewalk, she thought about the old man's wrist, where that expensive watch used to shine. A piece of luxury amid the rags, a metaphor perhaps for not judging by appearances. The question throbbed in her mind as she walked on, one step at a time, huddled in her coat. Emily looks at the blank paper, sighs, and thinks, "He's telling me something without words. Could this be a test of character, patience, or courage?" The rain showed no signs of letting up, turning the sidewalks into mirrors stained with dim light. The next morning, Emily arrived at the restaurant earlier than usual, her expression tense. She had slept poorly, tossing ideas around in bed. Determined not to stay in the dark, she decided to ask discreet questions around the neighborhood before opening Bell's Eatery. She spoke with the newsstand vendor on the corner, who just shrugged. Consulted the lady from the nearby store, who didn't know anyone like that mysterious old man. She even tried the milk delivery man, but he had no information. All she heard were vague rumors about an elderly businessman who, they said, sometimes tested the loyalty and character of his employees. But there was nothing concrete, just ownerless rumors. Back at the restaurant, she found the same heavy atmosphere. Ted paced back and forth, discouraged by the terrible sales. Sandra, always skeptical, arranged silverware unhurriedly, while Mark examined the pantry with a dissatisfied frown. The disappearance of ingredients continued to intrigue everyone, and the suspicion of someone diverting food made the air even thicker. The environment didn't help. Some customers who entered wrinkled their noses, complaining about the strange odor in some corner of the dining room. Perhaps something spoiled in the cabinet, or a dead rat in the ceiling. Nobody knew for sure. Emily tried to cover it up by lighting a scented candle to ease the smell, but Sandra mocked her, saying that wouldn't pay the bills. Ted, impatient, shot her a hard look, as if everything was Emily's fault and her habit of helping strangers. With few tables occupied, the afternoon dragged on in uncomfortable silence. Emily felt the pressure mounting. She needed to understand what was happening. There was the old man, the expensive watch, the missing food, the growing tension among everyone. And above all, that man in the gray suit who had appeared one day, watching her from a corner without saying his name. She remembered the vague words she'd heard in the neighborhood, a businessman testing people. Was the old man a businessman in disguise? Or was that man in the suit the real boss, observing every move, every reaction? Late in the afternoon, while Emily was cleaning a table near the window, the restaurant door opened, and the old man entered again. His appearance remained humble, but his posture was strangely confident. He didn't seem like a common beggar. There was something in his gaze, an attentive, calculating gleam. Emily froze with the cleaning cloth in her hand, her heart beating faster. Ted raised his eyebrows. Sandra rolled her eyes. Mark just peeked from the kitchen. Without saying a word, the old man walked to an empty table in the center of the dining room. He sat down calmly, scanning the corners. Emily dried her hands on her apron and approached, keeping her voice low and respectful. "Good afternoon, sir. Can I help you with something?" He didn't respond, just slightly raised his wrist, letting the luxurious watch shine under the yellowish light. Ted, behind the counter, sighed loudly, irritated with that game. Sandra disguised an ironic smile. Mark remained quiet. Emily felt a shiver. That watch seemed to scream that the old man didn't belong in this beggar role. Did he want everyone to know? The old man placed a small note on the table. It was a folded piece of paper, very similar to the one he had left before. Emily, hesitant, stepped forward to take it, but the old man raised his hand, asking her to wait. Then, in a smooth gesture, he pushed the note 2 centimeters forward and nodded slightly to Emily, as if inviting her to take the paper. She did so carefully, feeling Ted's gaze burning on her neck. Upon unfolding it, she found only a blank sheet. Again. No words, no clear clue. Just that provocative emptiness. Emily sighed, frustrated, but noticed that the old man was observing her expression intensely. He wanted to see her reaction to the void, her level of patience, her willingness to persist in the enigma. Before Emily could say anything, the old man stood up, adjusted his worn coat, looked at Ted with an enigmatic gaze, and headed to the door. "Aren't you going to say anything, sir?" Emily risked, her voice almost pleading. No response. The old man walked out into the gentle rain, disappearing on the wet sidewalk. Emily stood still, holding the blank paper. Ted was furious. "This has gone too far. He only comes here to disturb us." Sandra agreed with a nod, while Mark dropped the ladle in the kitchen, not knowing what to think. Emily, however, didn't blame the old man. She felt there was a reason, a greater purpose. Perhaps he was testing her perseverance, her faith in others' kindness. With the restaurant almost empty, Emily kept the paper in her pocket, along with the other blank napkin she already had. Now she had 2 papers, 2 unsolved enigmas. She remembered the rumors about eccentric businessmen who test their employees. Was this a test of honesty, of patience, of resilience? While arranging the chairs at the end of the shift, the image of the old man wouldn't leave her mind. The expensive watch, the silence, the blank papers. Everything pointed to something far beyond a simple beggar. Her thoughts were interrupted by a distant thunder. The rain continued, but now with lightning in the distance, illuminating the puddles on the sidewalk. Ted, already impatient, hurried to close the restaurant. Sandra followed, muttering that this was getting on her nerves. Mark put the ladle aside, wishing good night in a neutral tone. Emily was the last to leave, carefully locking the door. She looked at the cold, wet street, the raindrops sliding down the lampposts, and put her hand in her pocket, feeling the crumpled paper between her fingers. The old man was a challenge, an invitation to look beyond the obvious. What if he was the owner of the restaurant chain himself in disguise? What if he was testing her character, her empathy, and her courage? Emily thought of her sick mother, the money missing for rent, the threat of losing her job. She couldn't fail now. If it was a test, she needed to prove her worth. She needed to persist, understand, not give up in the face of blank enigmas. She turned to the street, breathed in the humid air, and went on her way. Each step on the sidewalk made her think about the next time the old man would appear. Would she be ready to understand his silence? He was cornering her without saying anything, forcing her to see what was in front of her eyes. Emily clenched her fists, determined to discover the truth, no matter what it takes. Emily keeps the crumpled note, feeling there's an invisible message there. As she leaves the restaurant, the rain starts falling again, and she understands that the old man is not a simple beggar. She needs to discover what's behind that silence before time runs out. Dawn was advancing, and the city slept restlessly under the persistent rain. The next morning, Emily arrived at the restaurant with a strange feeling in her chest, a kind of omen. The chairs were in their usual place, the counter clean, but the air felt heavier. She felt an invisible tension when putting on her apron. Inside, Ted and Sandra exchanged apprehensive looks. Mark, more serious than usual, arranged pans in the kitchen. The silence of early morning was broken by the noise of the door, but this time, who entered wasn't a customer looking for coffee or a mysterious old man with an expensive watch. There were 3 men, 2 familiar ones and a third that Emily had never seen. She immediately recognized the 2 bandits who had tried to rob the register days ago. They were back, more furious, with eyes scanning the room in search of easy money. The third man, larger and more corpulent, carried a piece of wood in his hand, tapping it lightly on his palm as if warning he hadn't come to play games. "Think you can throw us out like that?" said one of them, voice hoarse and bitter. "We want the money now, and no resistance." Ted turned pale. Sandra stepped back. Mark appeared at the kitchen door holding a frying pan. Emily felt her heart race. She needed to do something. "Please, calm down. We don't have much. The restaurant is empty," she tried to argue. The largest of the 3 advanced, grabbing Ted by the collar and lifting him a few inches off the ground. "No excuses. We want the safe money," roared the big man. Ted couldn't speak. Sandra, cornered, put her hand to her mouth, trying not to scream. Mark gritted his teeth, but hesitated to advance against 3 armed men. Emily knew she couldn't stand idle. Even trembling, she grabbed a glass bottle from the counter and gripped it tightly. Fear was spinning in her stomach, but she had no choice. If they took the money and hurt someone, it would be the end. She needed to protect the place that, despite all problems, was her livelihood and hope. Swallowing her panic, Emily approached. "Let Ted go, please. We'll give you what you want. Just don't hurt anyone." The big man laughed. "How cute. The little lady wants to negotiate." Before Emily could think of another move, the bandit holding Ted threw the manager against the counter, threatening to strike Emily with the piece of wood. She backed away, eyes wide, the bottle trembling in her hand. Mark tried to advance, but one of the other men stopped him, pushing him against the wall. It seemed chaos was about to explode into violence. But, as if fate had other plans, the door burst open. The old man had appeared again. His coat, though worn, was cleaner. The disheveled beard was still there, but his eyes shone with determination. He didn't seem scared. On the contrary, there was something firm in his posture, as if he knew exactly what to do. The bandits were distracted for a moment by the unexpected arrival of this unlikely elderly man. The big man let go of Ted, intrigued, and turned to the old man. "Who are you, old-timer? Get out before you get hurt." The old man didn't respond. He didn't need to. He advanced with surprising agility, grabbing the big man's arm and twisting it in a quick movement. The bandit howled in pain. Emily was dumbfounded. Sandra let out a muffled scream. Ted tried to compose himself behind the counter, and Mark watched in disbelief. The other two bandits tried to react, but the old man dodged a punch and landed a precise elbow to one's stomach, dropping him to the floor. The third, seeing all was lost, ran for the door, trying to escape. But this time he couldn't get away so easily. In the corner of the room, sitting silently until then, was the man in the gray suit that Emily had seen once before. He simply stretched out his leg at the right moment, making the bandit trip and fall face first onto the floor. It was so simple it seemed like a magic trick. Now the three bandits were either knocked out or immobilized. The old man released the big man, who was groaning on the floor, and raised his eyes to Emily. She, breathless, didn't know what to say. In the blink of an eye, the threat had disappeared. The restaurant was safe. "Thank you, sir. Once again you helped us," said Emily, her voice trembling. The old man nodded, a minimal gesture, almost a smile. Then he turned to the man in the suit, who was watching him with an enigmatic smile. The two exchanged a knowing look, as if speaking a secret language. Then the man in the suit stood up, adjusted his sleeves, and walked out the door without saying a word. The old man did the same, walking unhurriedly, leaving Emily, Ted, Sandra, and Mark alone with the fallen bandits. Moments later, the police were called by some attentive neighbor who heard the noise. The three criminals were arrested outside, howling insults but offering no more resistance. As the police took the men away, Emily was still trying to process what had happened. The old man and the man in the suit had acted together, without a single dialogue. Who were they? Ted, pale, adjusted his collar and looked around. Sandra still seemed in shock, and Mark, though sore in the shoulder from the push, displayed a slight smile of relief. Emily, however, felt even more confusion. The old man wasn't just a homeless person. The man in the suit wasn't just any customer. It seemed both knew more about the place, the employees, than they showed. When everything calmed down, the street returned to the murmur of fine rain, and the restaurant, though shaken, remained standing. Emily hadn't lost her job, no one had been seriously hurt, and the register remained intact. But the questions now multiplied. Why did the old man always appear when they needed help? Why did the man in the suit collaborate without saying anything? What kind of test was this, after all? At that moment, while watching Ted try to compose himself and Mark massage his shoulder, Emily realized that the pieces of the puzzle were coming together. The old man and the man in the suit were connected somehow. Maybe one was responsible for the series of tests. Maybe they were evaluating everyone's reaction to the crisis. Emily felt she needed to understand this mystery soon, before the restaurant was pushed to the limit. Emily stands at the open door, watching the old man's silhouette disappear, his phrase echoing in her mind, and wonders, "Who are you really?" That night was one of the longest, after the confrontation with the bandits and the escape of the old man and the man in the suit. The restaurant was plunged into a disturbing silence. The next day, the sun tried to break through the blockade of clouds, timidly illuminating the facade of Bell's Eatery, but the interior of the hall remained cold and tense. Emily arrived earlier than usual, her heart heavy. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she was certain that something important was about to happen. Ted, with a tired countenance, was shuffling papers at the counter. He seemed to be checking accounts, weighing losses, muttering in disagreement. Sandra was organizing glasses and cutlery with mechanical gestures, without enthusiasm, looking at the door from time to time. Mark, with the wooden spoon in hand, stirred a thin soup, still nervous from recent incidents. The entire restaurant seemed suspended between hope and fear, between the possibility of a future or imminent collapse. At the end of the morning, the door opened, emitting its familiar creak. When Emily raised her eyes, she was startled. Instead of the dirty and silent old man, a more well-groomed man entered, with well-trimmed hair and a sober suit. Next to him was the man in the gray suit who had appeared before. The second kept his hands in his pockets, discreet, observing everything with a neutral gaze. The first, however, carried a dominant presence. It was as if the air changed density when he stepped inside. Emily approached, hesitant, feeling her legs trembling. Ted dropped the papers, perplexed. Sandra stopped what she was doing, the glass halfway to the shelf. Mark set the spoon in the cauldron, cautious. The two men walked to the center of the hall, examining the place. The well-groomed one, who was leading, touched a chair, analyzed the counter, looked at the ceiling, a discreet smile on his lips. Then he turned to Emily. "Good morning," he said, his voice deep but calm. "I see things aren't going very well here, are they?" Before Emily could respond, Ted stepped forward, nervous. "Excuse me, sir. Who are you? Can I help?" The man raised his eyebrows, feigning surprise. Then he made a gesture to his companion in the gray suit, who just gave a slight smile. "I expected you would know," said the well-groomed man. "After all, I have been visiting this place several times. Do you recognize me without the dirt, without the worn clothes?" Emily gasped. The voice, the way of speaking, the firm gaze. It was him. The old man had changed his appearance, removing the disguise. Before a hunched beggar, now a distinguished gentleman, well-aligned gray hair, a luxury watch shining on his wrist. Ted stepped back, shocked. Sandra covered her mouth, incredulous. Mark furrowed his brow, trying to understand. You were the old man," Emily stammered, her voice failing. The man nodded, satisfied that she had noticed. "I'm Harold Jenkins, owner of the Jenkins and Comer chain, owner of this restaurant and many others. I was in disguise, testing the staff, the quality of service, the reaction to adversity. And honestly, I'm not impressed with what I saw." A deadly silence fell over the hall. Ted turned pale, remembering the times he had treated the old man with suspicion and irritation. Sandra almost dropped the glass she was holding. Mark, who had been grumpy and indifferent, didn't know where to put his hands. Emily felt a lump in her throat. She had helped him without knowing who he was, offered food from her own pocket. Now he was there, revealing himself as the owner of everything. "I wanted to see if there was compassion, honesty, courage in here," Jenkins continued, taking a step closer to Emily. "You, girl, showed kindness by giving me your meal, without receiving anything in return. For that, I admire your attitude. But I can't ignore the chaos. Bandits entering, frightened employees, food disappearing, empty clientele. How to maintain a business like this?" Ted stuttered, trying to justify. "Mr. Jenkins, I had no idea. We didn't know that you... If I had known, I would have..." Jenkins raised his hand, silencing him. "That's the point. You shouldn't treat someone well only if you know who they are, but rather for what they need. This was the lesson, and Emily passed the test, offering her own meal to a stranger." Emily's face heated up. She hadn't done that expecting recognition. She had just acted out of compassion. "However," Jenkins continued, his voice now firmer, "I can't ignore the disorganization. The place is on the brink of failure. I need to make a decision." Sandra held her breath. Mark cleared his throat. Ted closed his eyes, expecting the worst. "I'm considering closing this restaurant," said Jenkins, crossing his arms. "Why maintain an unsafe business, without profit, and with fearful employees? It doesn't make sense unless something changes." The word close hung in the air like a threat of storm. Emily felt a tightness in her chest, thinking of her sick mother, the late rent, everything she would lose if the restaurant ceased operations. She couldn't let that happen. "Wait," said Emily, her voice hoarse with anxiety. "Please give us a chance. We can improve things, bring more security, clean up the mess. We can change, I promise." Jenkins stared at her attentively. There was something understanding in his gaze, but also a harsh demand. "A chance?" he asked, slightly raising his chin. "And what guarantees that you will be able to resolve this soon?" Emily swallowed hard. She felt Ted, Sandra, and Mark's gaze upon her. It was the opportunity to save everyone's job, her own livelihood, the dignity of the place. "Give us 24 hours, she said, trying to sound confident. "We'll organize the restaurant, improve security, think of promotions to attract customers. We can get help from the neighborhood, call the police, reinforce the lock, revise the menu. Please don't close yet." Jenkins remained silent for a few moments, analyzing the faces in the hall. The man in the gray suit behind him observed everything, impassive, like a silent bodyguard. Then Jenkins smiled, a contained smile, almost imperceptible. "Very well, Emily. 24 hours. If by the end of tomorrow I don't see real improvements, I'll close this place. If you succeed, I'll think about what to do next." Saying this, he turned and left, followed by the man in the gray suit. The door closed with a slight thud. The sun outside remained undecided, but at least there was no more rain. Now it was up to Emily and the others to work hard. Ted, Sandra, and Mark looked at Emily, stunned, frightened, but seeing in her a new leadership, a thread of hope. She breathed deeply, trying to control the trembling in her hands. They needed to unite. So much depended on this. "We have to act quickly," she said, her voice a little shaky but firm. "We have less than a day to change the destiny of this place." The next day's sun wasn't bright, but at least the light rain had given a break. Emily arrived at the restaurant even earlier than usual, with a knot in her stomach. She had less than 24 hours to prove to Harold Jenkins, and to herself, that the place deserved to survive. The first thing she did was turn on all the lights in the dining room, letting the brightness spread into the corners. She could no longer hide in the gray morning. She needed light, hard work, and hope. Ted showed up soon after, his face tired but without his usual arrogance. Sandra came in zipping up her jacket, silent, and Mark came last, still rubbing his eyes. They all seemed tense, aware that the restaurant's fate was at stake. "So, where do we start?" asked Ted, humbler than ever. Emily took a deep breath, trying to remember everything she had promised Jenkins. "First, we need to clean everything. The place has to be spotless. Sandra, help me with the tables, chairs, counter. Ted, see if you can get posters or something that draws attention outside. Mark, check the kitchen, throw out what's not good. Arrange the pots, make something special on the menu. Then we'll talk to the neighborhood, call the police for extra patrols, and think about a small promotion. We have little time." They didn't protest. Maybe because they were too tired to argue, or because they understood what was at stake. Each went to their post. Emily and Sandra spent a good time cleaning tables, sweeping the floor, straightening crooked pictures on the walls, putting flowers on the tables. Emily had bought a handful of cheap flowers with her savings. Sandra, previously so skeptical, stopped complaining and worked in silence, with a steady focus in her eyes. Ted left hurriedly, returning shortly after with some handwritten posters, promising a stew festival to attract people. It wasn't very professional, but it was honest and simple. He pasted the posters in the window, adjusted the sign outside, talked to a friend from next door to spread the news. Even reluctantly, he was cooperating. In the kitchen, Mark separated the fresh vegetables from those that weren't good, cleaned the knives, organized the pots, and created a special dish, a stew rich in flavors, with aromatic seasonings. The idea was to offer a promotional menu with more affordable prices, something to attract people looking for comfort and good food. After 2 hours of intense work, the restaurant already looked like a different place. The chairs were shining, the floor was clean, the smell of flowers and seasonings mixed in the air. Emily looked around, satisfied with the progress, but knew they needed more than just appearance. They needed security and confidence. She took her phone and called a friend who worked at the local police station. She explained the situation, asked for extra patrols, mentioned the recent robberies. Her friend promised to pass by the street whenever possible, and that already brought some relief. "Thank you, really," said Emily, hanging up with a shy smile. Sandra, seeing the call, raised her eyebrows. "You know people in the police?" "She's a childhood friend. We haven't been close for years, but she always said I could count on her if I needed to," Emily responded, shrugging. Sandra nodded, impressed. This sweet girl was surprising everyone. Shortly before lunch, a group of curious neighbors appeared. One of them, a gentleman who always rushed by to grab the newspaper, praised the poster in the window. A woman from the building next door asked about the Stew Festival. Emily invited them in to try the soup and participate in a small promotion. Buy a dish, get a free coffee. It was simple, but it made a difference. Ted, behind the counter, noticed that Emily's posture was different, more confident, firmer. He recalled the harsh criticism he had given her, the distrust, the pickiness. Now she acted naturally, organizing, talking, inspiring others. It seemed impossible. But the girl who gave her meal to a homeless person was the same one now leading the team in a critical moment. Lunch brought some movement. Some tourists, intrigued by the poster in the window, came in looking for something hot. The neighbors came, sat down, tried Mark's special stew, and praised the flavor. Sandra served the tables with a discreet but sincere smile. Ted treated customers politely, without complaining about the register, and even managed to get some tips. The place seemed alive again, even if still far from a great success. During the afternoon, Emily went out for a few minutes to buy new light bulbs. The dining room light needed to be more cozy. Upon returning, she saw that Ted had reinforced the door lock, added an extra chain, and adjusted the lock. Sandra was cleaning the back corridor, removing the strange smell that had bothered customers, while Mark cleaned the storage room, investigating the source of the missing steaks. That's when Mark found an old jacket with the name John embroidered, hidden behind empty boxes and empty food packages. Proof that a fired ex-employee had been stealing from stock. Now they had clues to give to the police. The hours passed, and the restaurant maintained constant movement. It wasn't packed, but compared to previous days, it was a miracle. The atmosphere seemed different. Soft comments, shy smiles between employees, tension giving way to determination. Emily, exhausted but happy, thought about her sick mother, expensive medications, overdue rent. Would Jenkins give them a chance? At least now she had the feeling they were doing everything they could. Near the end of the day, the sun was already hiding behind the buildings. Emily cleaned the last traces of food from the counter, while Sandra dried glasses more carefully than she ever had. Mark was closing the kitchen, satisfied with the reception of the stew. Ted was doing calculations in his notebook, shaking his head, surprised by the tips and extra notes left by customers. "I think we achieved a decent result," said Sandra, storing the last glass. "Yes, I think so," agreed Mark, massaging his shoulder, still sore from the confrontation with the thieves, but with a half-smile on his face. Ted approached Emily, scratching his neck. "Listen, I know I was hard on you, but thank you. I think without your initiative, we wouldn't have gotten this far." Emily smiled, emotional. It wasn't easy to receive compliments from Ted, but there it was. Proof that she had somewhat transformed that dynamic. "We did this together, Ted," she said sincerely. Everyone collaborated. Now everything depended on Jenkins's decision. Would he come today? Tomorrow? Emily hoped he would appear at the last moment to check if the effort had been worth it. She kept looking at the street outside, the yellowish lights of the lamppost, the sidewalk still wet from a passing rain. She felt a shiver down her spine, as if she knew that soon the fate would be revealed. The night advanced. The restaurant was closed to customers, but spotless. The atmosphere was one of expectation. Emily checked her phone. No new messages. Sandra sat in a chair, resting her feet. Mark stored the last pot. Ted arranged the papers on the counter, not knowing if it would be enough. Everyone stopped and looked at the door, as if Jenkins might appear at any moment. Emily holds the apron tightly, looking at the deserted street. Has he given up on us, or will he come at the last moment? The dawn was advancing silently, with only a few cars passing now and then on the wet street. Inside the restaurant, Emily, Ted, Sandra, and Mark waited in a mixture of fatigue and hope. They had done everything they could. The place was cleaner, more organized, security reinforced, the menu revised, the neighborhood at least curious. Still, the owner hadn't shown up. The time given by Jenkins would run out soon, and each minute without news seemed like a heavy burden on everyone's shoulders. Emily adjusted her apron, wiped a drop of sweat from her forehead, and looked at the wall clock. The night was late. Ted, sitting at a table, drummed his fingers incessantly. Sandra rested her chin in her hand, silent, and Mark fiddled absently with a napkin. The silence between them was now one of mutual understanding, without accusations. They were in this boat together, whether to triumph or sink. Then, close to the deadline, the door latch made a slight noise. Emily jumped up, her heart racing. The doorknob turned slowly, and Jenkins entered. With each step, his serious face was illuminated by the yellow light of the hall. Beside him, the man in the gray suit, always quiet, observed everything in silence. Jenkins examined the place with sharp eyes, noticing the flowers on the tables, the aligned chairs, the clean counter, the subtle aroma of the stew that Mark had prepared earlier. He looked like an inspector analyzing the details of a painting, looking for imperfections or signs of genuine effort. "Good evening," said Jenkins, his voice low but firm. Emily stepped forward. "Good evening, sir. We did the best we could. We cleaned, organized, thought about promotions. We had customers, received tips, asked the police for patrols. We tried to show that this place is worth it." Jenkins walked to the counter, running his fingers over the impeccable surfaces. Ted stood up, restless. Sandra involuntarily arranged a flower in the vase, wanting to make a good impression. Mark, in the background, wiped his hands on his apron, impatient. "I asked for real changes," said Jenkins, turning slowly, evaluating everything. "Do you believe this is enough?" A chill ran down Emily's spine. She knew they had done a lot, but she also knew that you can't make a miracle in a single day. Still, she answered honestly, "Sir, we can't change everything in such a short time, but we gave our best. The place is safer, more welcoming. The employees worked together without fights, without chaos. We had satisfied customers today. It's not a huge profit, but it's a start. Please trust us a little more." Jenkins observed her closely, eye to eye. "You gave your own meal to a stranger. You risked yourself by confronting criminals. Now you led an effort for change. I see determination in you, Emily. But what about the others?" Emily swallowed hard and looked at Ted, Sandra, and Mark. Each had a different weight on their backs, but now they seemed united. "They cooperated, sir," she said, her voice firm. "Sandra, who used to complain, worked hard, cleaning and organizing. Mark put effort into the kitchen, created a special dish, and helped make the menu more attractive. Ted went out to make posters, attract customers, reinforce security. They understood what was at stake and dedicated themselves." Jenkins nodded, thoughtful. The man in the gray suit remained silent, like a statue beside him. "Very well. It's a good sign when the team unites in the face of adversity." He walked to the window, observing the empty street, and continued. "I wanted to see if this restaurant had more than walls and chairs. I wanted to know if there was compassion, courage, and ability to adapt. In the first days, I saw fear, insecurity, even lack of professionalism. But I also saw you, Emily, offering help to those in need, even without gaining anything in return. I saw your persistence in seeking last-minute solutions. That's what I need in my business. Emily felt a warmth in her chest, a flame of hope lighting up. Sandra gave her a look of surprise. Mark frowned, intrigued, and Ted seemed relieved, as if a weight had been lifted from their shoulders. Jenkins turned to Emily and, with a calm gesture, pulled an envelope from the inside pocket of his jacket. I know you have financial problems and a sick mother. Take this. It's a bonus. Help so you can buy the necessary medicines. And starting tomorrow, you'll be my assistant manager here. I want to see what you can do in the long term, not just in one day of desperate effort. Emily brought her hand to her mouth, her eyes watering. That envelope represented much more than money. It was recognition, a chance to stabilize her life and her mother's health, a vote of confidence. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Jenkins. I have no words to thank you. I will dedicate myself even more, I promise. Mark, with a discreet smile, said, I guess we'll have to get used to the boss, huh, Ted? Ted, awkwardly, nodded in agreement. She deserves it. Worked hard, kept calm, it's fair. Sandra stepped forward, a glimmer of respect in her gaze. Congratulations, Emily. I think I didn't judge you correctly at first. Emily smiled emotionally, understanding that this moment was a milestone in everyone's life. Jenkins looked around one more time, satisfied, but before leaving, let slip one last curiosity. Why disguise myself as a beggar and create all this confusion? Many companies fall into decay due to lack of character and courage. I wanted to see who would keep their heart pure in the face of the storm. You not only remained faithful to what you believed in, but led your colleagues when they needed it most. He patted Emily on the shoulder and, accompanied by the man in the gray suit, headed for the door. When he was about to leave, he turned with an enigmatic smile. Keep it up, Emily. Remember that kindness and determination transform the world. This restaurant now has a future because you showed the way. Left alone with the team, Emily held the envelope against her chest. Everything she had gone through, the doubts, the fear, the attacks, the old man's riddles, now made sense. She had learned that appearances deceive, that compassion is not weakness, and that with hard work and hope, it's possible to change the course of things. Ted leaned on the counter, exhaling forcefully. Sandra smiled from the corner of her mouth. Mark discreetly wiped a wet eye. Emily arranged a flower in the vase on the table, breathing deeply. She had money for her mother's medicines, had a better position, had proof that her effort had been worth it. The rain had ceased, and the night air was now clean, almost sweet. She walked to the light switch, looked at the empty hall but full of potential. She felt a comforting warmth in her chest, knowing that a new dawn was near. With the envelope in her hands and a light heart, Emily turns off the restaurant lights, ready for a new dawn, knowing that generosity, empathy, and courage can transform even the grayest day into hope.